Darr. I'm the Executive Vice President for Maritime Policy and Government Affairs at the MSC Group in Geneva, Switzerland. The MSC Group is the parent company of the second largest container shipping company in the world, the third largest cruise line in the world, and also an operator of a series of ocean-going ferries, high-speed craft, railways to support intermodal transport, and about 10,000 trucks to do the same. So our core business really is carbon intensive, and it's all about transport and connecting the world together. I personally absolutely love ships and everything to do with them. I joined the Navy when I was 17 years old and started out in nuclear engineering and submarines, and moved my way to the deck through the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and progressed on to the U.S. Coast Guard, where I was a ship inspector and casualty investigator before eventually becoming a lawyer and leading a great group of people that dedicated their lives to the maritime sector and protecting the people that served in it. I left there to join the Cruise Lines International Association when I retired from the Coast Guard, and that really was my first jump into the private sector. And what an absolute experience to drink from a fire hose, because there was just so much going on all the time, and we were in the middle of a massive regeneration of the fleet and advancing technologies. In 2017, I had the good fortune to be invited by MSC to come join them and take this job at the MSC Group, which I love. And I love it first and foremost because it's an amazing enterprise, and it's truly family owned. It has a different spirit about it, which on a personal level really means a lot to me. And it's not like any corporate experience I ever had, but it also is all about ships all day long, every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, which if you're wired like me, nothing gets better. So if you think about what we're facing on the policy side, and policy is a major part of what I do, and that is integration of internal policy and external policy, relationships and activities via trade associations, and our relationships with governments around the world in the 155 countries that we operate in. What is the single biggest challenge that we're facing? It is so simple. I mean, it is decarbonization. This is not only the biggest regulatory challenge and the biggest policy challenge and practical challenge that we're facing today. In my opinion, this will be the biggest one ever. It's certainly the biggest one by far. And this is not something that's going to be solved overnight. We're going to be at this for quite a while. But the work that we do today and the decisions that we make today are going to lay the foundation for a decarbonized future. That is essential not only for shipping, but for all of society. And we as shipping, even though maybe we represent 2 to 3%, depending on which number you want to hang your hat on, of current anthropogenic greenhouse gas loading in the atmosphere, has to do our part. That's a significant component of it. And as other easier to decarbonize sectors begin to do their part, our proportion is likely to continue to increase if we don't make some significant changes now. The problem we have is the real changes that we need aren't really available yet. We as ship owners are willing to make the investments, we're willing to take risks, we're willing to deploy technologies in our fleets, we're willing to do trials and cooperate with those that can bring the solutions to the table. But we're not in the core business of designing energy conversion devices such as advanced internal combustion engines or gas turbine engines or fuel cells. We're also definitely not in the business of bringing alternative energy and fuels related to energy overall to the marketplace and distributing them throughout the value chain so that we can have what we need to operate. So we can't do this alone. We have to do this in partnership with all the key stakeholders working together. So that's a big part of our strategy at MSC, is finding the right trusted stakeholders that will be good strategic partners for us as we work shoulder to shoulder to solve this very complicated puzzle. Where do we stand today? Well, it's a challenge today, because although there are some things on the horizon, some close on the horizon, some much farther over the horizon that have complete decarbonization potential to them, at the moment, what you've really got in the way of decarbonization as a ship owner are energy efficiency measures, fossil-based LNG, and biofuels. And when I say that those are available, I mean not available just on a test basis, but really available at scale that you can implement on a broad level and make changes today. At our company, we're doing all three of those. We're focused very heavily on all three, and I'll take them in reverse order. On biofuels, we used approximately 850,000 metric tons of sustainable second generation biofuels in 2020 in our fleet, up to a 47% blend. Now, the market conditions and the availability of biofuels and the competition for that is going to make that a real challenge in the long term to be a solution for shipping, but it no doubt plays a role, and it can play a role today. And because we already went to 47%, and we know we could go higher if the conditions warranted it, we're ready. We're well beyond any trials, and we actually replaced all of our routine bunkering in Rotterdam with biofuels during 2020, to the extent that our provider could supply it to us. With fossil-based LNG, it's not a complete solution for sure, because fossil-based LNG, again, depending on which numbers you want to look at and where you want to place the goalpost, I think it's a realistic estimate that you get about an 8 to 23% life cycle well to wake sort of reduction in CO2 equivalent. You can come up with bigger numbers, you can come up with smaller numbers, but I think that's a fairly safe range. But that's available today. You can do it today. We are doing that today. We are committed to that not only in our cruise sector, where we have 3 ships under contract right now for construction, the first one to be delivered next year, but also some developmental work going along with that. But we've also recently committed to LNG new builds for our cargo fleet as well. Now keep in mind we have 600 ships, so if you add in a relatively small number, it doesn't change things overnight, but it's a space that we think we need to be into, not because it's a complete solution today, because it's not. It's a partial solution and an improvement today, but if you can migrate off of the fossil LNG onto bio and synthetic LNG, it is a totally different world with regard to net decarbonization. And our long-term planning has that figuring prominently in the progression of the lifespan of these ships. And then lastly, which I mentioned first, is energy efficiency. And energy efficiency is a place you can always improve at. And although we've done a huge amount, both with regard to how we have operated our ships and designed our ships in the past, but also in how they interact with the entire itinerary. And so I think that there's in particular a lot more to be gained, particularly using digitalization tools to optimize voyages and make sure that we're not traveling faster and consuming more fuel than we need to for any particular service. And so there's some room to go there. But with energy efficiency, the low-hanging fruit has largely been picked. There's more that you can gain there, but it's not going to get you to complete decarbonization. I think that's really an impossibility based on the laws of physics, but you can make a big difference now and you can continue working at it. But one reason I emphasize that and saved it for last is it's a bit of a springboard into the future, because I predict energy efficiency is going to play an even bigger role for alternative fuels and in our future than it does today. And that's for 2 basic reasons. That all of the true decarbonized fuels that we're looking at for future usage have energy density problems. And so being able to store enough volume of those fuels to have the levels of autonomy that we need in shipping, which is one of the huge obstacles to decarbonizing our sector, is really a puzzle that's got to be solved. And if you can solve it by needing less of the fuel, so say for example, if fuel cells can be scaled up so you take advantage of say the 35% or so gain in efficiency over even a high-end internal combustion engine today, well, you need less of that alternative fuel, and suddenly that volumetric challenge of that alternative fuel is not so far in the distance from something that can be overcome. Also, the price differential is likely to be very significant for these alternative fuels. There'll come a time when either the market just accepts that they're higher prices, or maybe things will normalize as the scale comes up and things get back into more of an equilibrium. But at least in the foreseeable future, there's going to be a substantial cost differential. So again, using less of those fuels is going to mean you can use them sooner and in greater volumes throughout your fleet because you'll be able to afford them and the price will be more competitive with the other options. So I think that's going to remain very important. So what are we looking at for the future? The short answer for MSC Group and for Bud personally, we're looking at everything. We're not in a position where we are prepared, I am not prepared to rule out any option completely at the moment, although we're starting to narrow the field a little bit on certain variations of fuels, because I think it's really harmful. I think those that think that there's one clear light at the end of the tunnel that we all should progress to and use just that one fuel path are in danger of being on a fool's errand. Because I don't believe for 1 second that there's going to be a one size fits all solution for all of shipping. As we look at our fleet, which also includes some ro-ros and some bulk carriers in it as well, and a lot of people don't know we have a few of those, there is not a one size fits all solution for our fleet. So I don't see how there could be for the entire industry. It's going to be very dependent on the type of ship you've got, the type of deployment, and maybe what the lifespan looks like on that particular ship and the capex involved in getting it on the water or maybe modifying it. And also, one reason I think it's very dangerous for us to look for one single solution rather than a solution set is that there is a huge amount of risk. And we're used to taking risk and de-risking our investment choices from a commercial standpoint all the time. I'm not really talking about that. Yes, there is some of that. But what I'm really talking about is risk that we are wrong. And I do not think that the dynamics of climate change can afford for us to be wrong. We can't bank on one particular solution and all end up in a dead end corridor if it turns out that it doesn't have the in state promise that we'd all hoped it did. So I think we need to have an open mind. We need to be creative and we need to accept that different companies and different individuals are going to analyze things differently and maybe come to different conclusions. But I don't think there's going to be one clear winner as far as thought or one clear winner as far as alternative fuel solutions. So what are we looking at specifically? We really like green hydrogen and the derivatives that come from that. I don't like to talk about hydrogen as if I'm just talking about the H2 molecule in isolation, because I think that's kind of unhelpful. Ultimately, we want to use that hydrogen, but it actually may be more useful for ocean transport in one of the derivative forms, such as green ammonia, maybe synthetic alcohols like methanol or synthetic LNG, all of which are most likely going to have to pass through that gateway of green hydrogen first before they're produced at scale by the methods we think are going to be most common going forward. Well, what's the challenge with that? First of all, to create the green hydrogen, and right now there's about 70 million metric tons or so of hydrogen produced annually, of which less than 1 million is actually by green production methods. You need a large amount of renewable energy, which doesn't exist right now, that has to be dedicated to this purpose. Then you have to build the infrastructure to actually electrolyze the water molecule to create the green hydrogen that you need. That doesn't exist yet, still got to happen. And then you have to compete for that hydrogen, which is going to have lots of other societal uses that are going to be quite valuable, and get enough of it to go towards fuel production towards what we want for one of these other sources. And say, for example, it's green ammonia. Well, then you need yet more renewable energy, more conversion devices to actually create the green ammonia out of what started as a hydrogen molecule. And then you've got to build a midstream and a downstream infrastructure that doesn't exist yet to get that to the ships. I don't say that because it's impossible. I think it's impossible. I don't. I actually like that as a possible solution. I'm just pointing out there's no easy answer here. There's no shortcut. It's going to take hard work. There are also challenges with production of synthetic methanol, synthetic LNG, but I think all of these are technically solvable problems, and I think they all need to be in the mix of our consideration. So let's step back for a little bit and talk about some things that maybe technologically aren't quite as challenging. So for example, biosourced LNG, which technically can be produced. It's not a complicated process in theory, but the scale isn't there right now and the economics aren't there right now. But I think it will be, and I think it has to be. The feedstock for creating those are things that pretty much nobody else in society wants anymore, like pig manure, for example, or organic waste that comes from agriculture that's already served its useful purpose. Um, this is possible, and the good thing about bio LNG or the synthetic LNG I talked about that may come from green hydrogen production downrange a bit is it's all the CH4 molecule. So once you get it produced, you can actually blend it interchangeably with other sources. So maybe you don't have a perfect solution, but you've got a pretty good solution by blending in. It also acts exactly the same way in the delivery, storage, and consumption functions through the value chain in marine transportation. So there's some real value there. We should have an open mind about it, but we have to address methane slip, particularly on the upstream side when it comes to LNG, no matter what the source is, and on the consumption side on board, which I think technically the engine manufacturers are zeroing in on pretty well. Also, there's the possibility for biosourced methanol right now, but right now there's roughly 200 million or so metric tons of methanol produced worldwide. It's all got users. That's the thing to keep in mind too. And virtually none of it is produced by, not at volume anyway, from green sources. And so this is possible. It can use the same sort of feedstock, but it's not too far downrange. It really could happen. And I mentioned biofuels before of a conventional nature, something that emulates a diesel or a traditional fuel we would use in the engines. This is something that is available today. It's available at some scale today, but it's actually relatively limited, and there's a lot of competing users for it because, for example, it may be the best obvious solution for aviation going forward, and they're going to need to do their part to decarbonize too. So just because we think it's a good idea for the shipping sector doesn't mean we get to have it. We have to go out there and compete for it and get our fair share of it. And our infrastructure is a lot more complicated than for some of the other users. And I think we need to be realistic about that. So just in closing, what I would say is keep an open mind. Don't rule out modern atomic power, for example. I started my career in that space. I'm amazed at how far it's advanced and what a different type of systems being proposed today. Be creative. Supplemental powers such as wind, supplemental powers such as solar, and storage capacity with advanced batteries all have a role to play. But let's all work together to get this done, because it is just not an option for us to fail at doing this. Decarbonization is an existential requirement for not only our industry, but I think society believes for all of them too. And just because you don't feel quite as much pressure today from the customers doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, because the people that are most attuned to this today are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, and not necessarily the leaders 30 years downrange. They're going to be leaders sooner than you think it, and they are thought leaders right now, and we should be listening to these signals, taking it seriously, doing our part as a shipping industry, and I can assure you we're going to do our part as the MSC Group, and I could not be happier than to be right in the middle of working with others to help solve this very difficult challenge.